Um, and we can get started again. Such a rich time of year, and that richness comes with a light side and a shadow side, right? So there's so much abundance, and I think it can feel like, especially during, what Chinese medicine calls a tiger year, it can feel like there's a lot going on, you know, not only a lot to be harvested, on the physical level in terms of nourishment that's, being brought in by the farmers and gardeners from the fields, but also a lot to harvest in terms of community and connections and kind of filling our emotional and spiritual well, as we head into winter, which naturally for many of us does tend to be a little bit more of a time of hibernation, right? And that's why I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about, the harvest and foods of the harvest, and what might be inspiring from the Abenaki Indigenous tradition, which is, kind of the tribe that's here in Vermont, that I'm familiar with. And then also talk a little bit about the season of autumn and the metal element and kind of what we're entering into. So I want to share a little bit about those things, and then I'm excited to hear from you all, thoughts, questions, anything that's coming up. So the metal element, right? Chinese 5-element theory talks about metal, water, which is winter, wood, which is spring, fire, which is summer, and earth, which is late summer, right? Which we kind of just came through. And the metal element is an interesting one, right? Because I think, fire, water, earth, maybe a little bit easier to grasp. Wood, just in the sense of trees and, sap rising in the spring, maybe a little bit easier to grasp. And then the metal element, what is that really about? And the metal element can be described sort of most aptly in Chinese medicine as discernment and boundaries, right? So some practitioners describe it almost like as armor, right? The metal that we put on to protect ourselves, not only physically, right? This is a time to really bolster the immune system. Take your elderberry syrup on the daily, build that immunity up, and have that be your protective metal armor, right? But also the metal that gives us the energetic and emotional boundaries we need to be in the world with kindness and compassion and enthusiasm, and not get drained by what's happening in our lives, right? And Christy was just mentioning, supporting a lot of folks who are going through it. I'm sure that many of us have that experience at one time or another. And the metal element is really calling us to let go of what's not needed, and create those healthy boundaries for ourselves so that we can be bolstered, stabilized, protected, for water season, right? Which will be winter. So the metal element is kind of described in Chinese medicine from the emotional standpoint as when that metal element is in balance, there's joy, there's enthusiasm, and there's also capacity for compassion and understanding others. There is sort of pragmatism and organization, right? A person who's a metal element person is going to be very organized. They're going to be that person who gets the job done, and they're going to be, thoughtful about what they do, and kind of the steps that they take to meet a goal. Metal element out of balance is going to feel frazzled, disorganized to the point of overwhelm and even fear, right? It's like, oh no, did I do it right? Is this going to work out? Is it going to be okay? What's going to happen? Guess what? The next thing that's going to happen is winter. Um, and with winter comes the water, and the water is the ultimate yin element, the ultimate element of receptivity, the element that just kind of washes things away. And so knowing that water is next in the cycle of seasons is a helpful reminder when we feel the metal element kind of losing its grip on reality, and going into kind of an emotional tailspin, right? And it's a helpful thing to remember. And when the metal element is in balance, you know, that confident, joyful, compassionate, organized part of ourselves, we know that we've really reaped the benefits of late summer and all of those delicious sweet foods, the apples and pears, the winter squash that have been coming in, to strengthen ourselves, in preparation for this time of discernment and for this time of letting go, which is what the metal element is all about, right? Because the organs that track with metal are the lungs and the large intestine. So these are our organs of letting go, our organs of detoxification. The skin is also considered a metal element organ because we sweat through the skin, right? And the skin takes in a lot of information. So with our lungs, we're constantly detoxifying our system every time we take a breath out. And people who have experienced, you know, breathing and sending the breath to a particular part of the body that's, you know, achy or sore will know that the breath truly has the capacity to travel and really does have the capacity to detoxify, to take toxins, you know, just places in our body where life force energy isn't circulated and things are built up, and the breath can go in there and help things to circulate so that they can eventually be let go, right? So we're letting go when we're breathing out. We're letting go through the large intestine, of course, because the large intestine is, you know, taking water out of any waste that we need to eliminate and consolidating it so that we can eliminate it. And I think tending to the lungs and the large intestine at this time of year is such a powerful thing to do because those organs are so affected during the winter, right? In the winter, things can get a little dry, even though there's a lot of dampness here in the Northeast. Things can also feel dry, and in other parts of the country, even more so. And our lungs are, you know, yes, this method of detoxification when we breathe out, but they're also kind of our body's first line of taking things in, right? I always say breath is our first source of nourishment. Before we are nourished by food, at birth, we're nourished by taking in our first breath of air, right? And that breath is life. And that breath can contain viruses that can affect our lungs. And our lungs are always there to detoxify, release viruses so that they don't become an infection if we give the lungs the support that they need to go through that detoxification process with every breath. If we give the large intestine the support that it needs to eliminate all of our waste through our stool and not hang on to anything that we don't really need. So this time of year, most people think of a spring cleanse, right? Or a spring reset from a dietary perspective. But actually, this time of year is just as good of a time or as effective as of a time to simplify the way that we're eating because it allows for strengthening the lungs and the large intestine. So with any kind of simplification, I really say just go to the whole foods, right? animal foods, grains, beans, and veggies. So simple, and so nourishing. And the more kind of boring and repetitive it can be, the happier the body is. And the important flavor to include in the autumn time is the pungent flavor. So when we think about pungent, I think, somewhat of an analog to that is spicy, right? Because the spicy flavor, it can, when it's something like wasabi, very spicy, it immediately clears our sinuses, which is also healing and clearing our lungs. And then other sort of pungent or spicy foods are all of the alliums, like, onions, garlic, leeks, shallots, and then, of course, ginger. For those who can tolerate capsicum family plants, spicy peppers, those are great at this time of year. And also good to consider that all of these foods are either cooked in a meal, right? Sauteed onions and garlic and ginger with kale, or they're used as a condiment, right? Like I wouldn't sit down to a whole bowl of pickled horseradish, for example. But, I might put a little bit on my chicken to kind of make it more flavorful, more digestible, because that pungent flavor does stimulate bile flow from the liver to help the stomach break down our food. Um, and it's an interesting taste to add. And when the palate encounters that pungent taste, those organs, the lungs and the large intestine, the colon, are supported. And as we know, some hot sauces, for example, are so spicy that they literally cause folks to sweat. And again, that's that third sort of the sense organ of the metal element and of autumn is the skin. And it kind of, aligns with that pungency, right? Not trying to say, go out and eat tons of spicy hot food, because that's not appropriate for everyone, right? There are all these different ways to get the pungent flavor. But consider that in what you're cooking, foods are sort of supportive when they're cooked at this time of year, right? We're just exposing ourselves to a lot more cold, I think, because, the mornings and evenings are cooler, but yet the days are warmer. I think, a lot of people are maybe having these transition moments in time during the day where it's like, ooh, I'm a little chilly, right? And that pungent flavor helps to kind of stimulate the immune system, wake up the immune system, through supporting the lungs and the large intestine, and just say, hey, it's, we're going to get a little activated now because this is the time. This is the time to prepare for the colder months, and what those might bring. So I love thinking about the metal element and these boundaries, this discernment, and setting that up for ourselves in our lives. And that can really look like a simple daily rhythm of eating particular meals with particular ingredients at specific times, right? And I think from that kind of simple daily framework and platform, other things can follow. Things might come up: grief, sadness, memories from the past, things that feel like they want to come up and out, that they want to move, that, the emotional body wants to let those go. This is the time of year to let those go, right? We're heading into ancestor time in my tradition of, Italian Catholicism, and before that, sort of nature-based seasonal spirituality in that part of Europe. And, it's said that at this time of year, the veils are thin, right? The ancestors are traveling back and forth between this world and the other world. And it's easier to contact our ancestors, to contact our beloved dead. And it's a time to honor that, more of these kinds of influences may be coming through, which is why we want to call in and give thanks to those who are meaningful to us, spirits and ancestors. And then we want to have that metal element boundary, that armor, that discernment to also kind of energetically protect ourselves from influences that we don't want to be taking in, whether that's from the spirit realm and the ancestor realm, or, whether that's from just people with whom we interact, right? Or whether that's from viruses and bacteria that we might contact, right? And I think, having a nice daily food rhythm that's kind of boring and monotonous with the pungency and the spiciness of those added ingredients can be really supportive. And then considering, lighting a candle at dinner time, just making, a statement of gratitude to our ancestors, all who came before us, can be really nourishing and a really lovely way to just kind of make our way into the darker season. In the Celtic agrarian tradition, Samhain, which is now called Halloween in this country, or All Hallows Eve. In Italy, we don't celebrate Halloween, but we do celebrate All Saints' Day, which in Mexico is known as Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, right? November 1st. This is actually, in that Celtic agrarian tradition, it's the new year. It's when things begin. And I love that because in the Celtic tradition, things are beginning in the darkness, right? Things are beginning underground as we're going underground. And there's a lot of potential there. There's a lot of fertility there. And it's just a reminder that the boundaries that we create now, the discernment that we have now, prepares us. It's planting seeds, whether or not we know it, for what's to come, and how we will emerge into the spring after the water season into the wood season. So lots of things to ponder and to consider. And I love thinking about what I've learned from Abenaki elders about this time of year, because it's so very much in alignment with what's happening in the metal element, with what's happening with autumn. So in the Abenaki tradition, folks consider that the main crops are 7 sisters. So the 7 sisters are corn, beans, squash, ground cherries, and corn, beans, squash, ground cherries, and then seeds from particular gourds and pumpkins, like the New England long pie pumpkin, that are, from gourds whose flesh doesn't taste very good, but whose seeds are incredibly high in omega-3 and 6 anti-inflammatory fatty acids, incredibly high in zinc to support the immune system. And we gain so much nourishment from the seeds of certain squashes, as opposed to the flesh. And then sunflower seeds. So one of the Abenaki elders that I had the honor to meet before she passed, Peggy Doucette, she was of the Kawasek, the white pine strand, had all of these beautiful seed heads from her sunflower seeds, just laid out in this incredible spiral on her dining room table, and just allowing them to sit. And ultimately, as the seed heads dry out, when you flip them over, she said, it's time, because you flip them over and the seeds just kind of fall out. And she said, like a basket of stars. And I know it's so beautiful. And I love that because it's just a reminder of how Abenaki folks garden, which is by a constellation called the Pleiades. And the Pleiades are known as the seven sisters, right? So the Pleiades are seven stars, and I'm not discerning enough to really notice this, but a lot of Abenaki folks will look up into the sky, and as they see one of the sisters start to grow a little more dim, they know it's time to harvest the beans. Another sister kind of grows dim, they know it's time to harvest the corn, and so on and so forth, the squash, the melons, the ground cherries, the seed pumpkins, the sunflower seed heads. And then the reverse process happens in the spring. And now if you do get a constellation map and find the Pleiades in the sky, you can start to notice this. You'll start to notice that they're all kind of going dim right now. And then they will truly start to brighten one by one in the spring. And this is when the planting time is for all of the different seeds of these seven sisters. So it's a beautiful way to remember that we are nature. We are part of nature. We are part of the cycle of seasons, and everything that we do is informed by nature. And just as, the more we listen to what our body's messages are for nourishment and for support, the more we're guided by our own bodies. It's the same way with our environment. The more we pay attention to what's happening around us, the more that can be a guiding force. So cooking corn, beans, and squash right now, adding garlic, ground cherries, a little bit harder to find, but they're delicious. They kind of taste like a cross between a melon and a tomato. Getting more sunflower seeds in your life. They're really high in magnesium, which is, sort of nourishing, but also soothing and relaxing, just helping with that letting go, helping with elimination. And then the pumpkin seeds, which are so supportive to the lungs and so supportive to the immune system. And I love just thinking about, okay, how can I kind of center those foods in what I'm eating right now, as long as those foods feel like they're digestible to you and not inflammatory. And I know that some foods on that list don't feel as great to some of us. And I love the idea of the seven sisters and kind of weaving in as many of those as feel appropriate for us. So I wanted to, before we kind of open it up for questions, I wanted to guide us through a little metal element exercise. And yes, I'm so glad you added those things, Nicole. They're so good, and so great for, interestingly, the pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds help regulate the two sides of the menstrual cycle. So pumpkin seeds kind of for the first half, sunflower seeds for the second half of the menstrual cycle. And I just love that correlation to autumn as well. And it's like, okay, let's kind of get things regulated. Let's let go of what's not needed. Let's get into a rhythm. Let's get into a flow so that when we do get to winter, we feel supported. We feel ready for the inward, more reflective time. So I love this exercise. And I learned this from an incredible Qigong teacher, Tom Long, that I actually had in college, and then kept studying with him for a long time afterwards. So part of Qigong, depending on the teacher, can be about also finding acupressure points on the body. And the acupressure points for lung 1 and 2 meridian, so the beginning of the lung meridian, are right at the top of the chest. And I'd love to help everybody find them if you're willing, and just see, sort of what tender spots you can find in there. So if you take a hand and just trace underneath the collarbone and kind of follow the collarbone until you feel that place where there's kind of a shoulder divot, right? Where, you know, if I went like this, I could kind of feel my shoulder blade. So there's kind of a hole there almost. So once you find that spot, go down just about an inch, 3/4 of an inch, and, you know, kind of palpate gently around until you feel a spot that maybe feels a little bit tender. And just start to massage that area in a circular clockwise motion, just gently rubbing that area, just feeling how that feels. You know, the lung 1 and 2 points are really opening up those doorways, opening up the lungs for letting go. And then kind of tap on that spot, knock on it, waking up the lungs, asking them to be present. And then we can find the other side. So again, tracing under the collarbone and kind of going in to that divot where the collarbone meets the shoulder blade, and then going down about an inch, kind of gently, you know, palpating around, seeing if you can find a spot that's a little tender. And again, massaging in that circular clockwise motion, opening up the lungs, asking for healthy boundaries, discernment, and the ability to let go. And now knocking or tapping on that spot. And then raising the arms up, bringing them back down. And just pausing for a moment to see what that feels like. Does it feel like there's a little more of an opening there? Just noticing. Opening up the lungs. For whatever's needed. And coming back. Looking around. Noticing what you notice. Turning our head from left to right, up and down. Supports the vagus nerve, our first cranial nerve that touches every single one of our organs as it travels up from the stomach, from the gut, into the brain. What are people noticing? Anything that's coming up for you?
I just wanted to answer your question. Right after we did that kind of acupressure activation, I guess, I felt a coolness.
Yes.
Across my chest. I don't know if I'm just chilled, but I couldn't help but notice it was immediately after that.
Yes.
And it does feel kind of different and open.
Mm-hmm.
It's a nice stretch too. Thanks for facilitating that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes so much sense, you know, when we open up a particular channel and energy that maybe wasn't flowing quite as much is flowing a little bit more. That sensation can feel kind of like a coolness, or some people will even describe it as a tingling. Some people will even feel it going down their arms. So I'm glad you noticed that.
I think along that line, my word was sort of refreshed.
Uh-huh.
That's
Yes.
kind of a cooling sensation too.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Refreshed. Yeah, and it can be interesting to kind of play around with that concept of cooling during a season when things are getting cold, and we want to bring in more of that pungency and those pungent flavors to warm us up, right? And there's always a yin and a yang, right? There's always the cool and receptive yin, which is the lungs, and then the warm yang, which is kind of, offering things out, and that's the large intestine. So I think there is always that balance, and it's certainly at this time of year all about being refreshed, and just relaxing, feeling those sensations. Um, so thank you for sharing.
I was feeling very overwhelmed the last week or two because a
Mm,
lot is happening medically for our son and questions for financial eligibility for his whole life and filling out forms and everything can make such a negative difference or a positive difference depending on who reads it and how it's interpreted. So I've been really all the things that you described, scared and whatever. And when we did these exercises just now, um, I started to get more relaxed. Just
mm.
amazingly, and I was like so appreciative.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm happy to hear that, and I'm sorry that's been overwhelming.
yeah,
And that's part of the nature of the metal element out of balance, right? Not to say that necessarily a person is out of balance, but a situation, a circumstance, an environment can be out of balance. And it's our work to, put on that metal armor of discernment and say, I witness this, I see this, I can hold space for this, and it doesn't have to penetrate, right? I don't have to breathe it in.
mm,
Um, I don't have to take it in. And, even just kind of tapping along the collarbone and then going down and finding those lung spots and just tapping in that area if you're feeling overwhelmed, can be really helpful and really supportive. Um,
wow,
So thank you for sharing.
yeah. It worked so far tonight.
Good, good. I'm glad.
Yeah. Our son David has a rare disease called acromegaly, and you know, they're anyway. They want to do an MRI of his head again. So he already had a tumor removed from his pituitary in 2017.
Mm,
And it looked like things were going in a really good direction, and the endocrinologist was almost in tears because she never gets to tell people that. And
good.
then it started changing again. So it's been very scary.
Of course. I
Yeah.
hear you. I hear you. And
Thank.
that really exemplifies the potential of what could arise at this time of year. And
Right.
it's about,
Yep.
letting go of the fear, trusting that what will be, and you have the capacity to hold it.
Yeah.
Um, it's a powerful teaching for sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Um, what else is coming up for folks? Thoughts, questions related to what I was talking about, related to what's going on in your life? Um, bring it on.
I always like to ask you for suggestions for tea for this particular season or this element. So love to hear that.
Great question. So roots are so great to start bringing in at this time of year, right? In the spring and summer, even late summer, we might be having just more of the leaf and flower teas. And then in the autumn and winter, sort of more of the roots can start coming in. This can be a time when we're feeling dryness and even like a scratchy, sore throat that's not actually illness related, but more dryness related. So roots that are kind of, in herbalism, we call them mucilaginous, right? So they create sort of like a beneficial gooiness, not like a bad gooiness, but they create that mucilage that's soothing to dryness. So licorice root, marshmallow root, really beneficial at this time of year. Licorice more warming, marshmallow a little bit more cooling. And then I think about, this is a bark, not a root, but cinnamon, really great at this time of year. And then of course, ginger and astragalus. Astragalus is kind of guangqi, right? It's our supreme immune tonic in Chinese medicine. And huangqi is that concept, you know, it's the Chinese word for astragalus, but it's also just that concept of that innate life force energy and cultivating its flow, right? Winter is more about cultivating its essence, right? The kidneys, winter, those oil lamps of the soul. Whereas autumn is about cultivating that flow of life force energy so that whatever needs to go out can go out. And I think making a tea of all of those is really amazing. And if you feel like you're running hot, have some marshmallow root in there. If you feel like you're running cool, add some licorice in there. Know that licorice does raise blood pressure a little bit. But that's such an incredible tea. And I like taking all of those roots, the cinnamon, the dried ginger, the licorice, the astragalus, and, you know, just kind of boiling them all together. It's called decoction, right? For 10 minutes or so, and then straining. And, you know, I make a big soup pot of those roots and then strain, and I put it in a big half-gallon mason jar, and then I can heat it up in the evening and in the morning. And just, you know, sometimes we'll add like some oat milk or some flax milk or sometimes honey. If things are feeling especially dry in your whole system, like if your stools are feeling dry, skin is feeling dry, throat, honey is actually a really wonderful remedy for dryness. And as we know, it's nature's most potent antibiotic next to garlic. And this is a great time to think about, you know, using garlic honey, right? Garlic has that nice pungency. Honey is antimicrobial. Garlic, of course, also antimicrobial. Minced or crushed garlic mixed with honey, allowed to sit for 5 minutes, is really the most incredible cold and flu remedy that's out there as kind of like a first line of defense. You know, put it on some toast, mix it in some oatmeal. If you're like me, you just eat a spoonful of it. It's not spicy and it wouldn't irritate the gut lining at all because the honey candies the garlic. And it's also a great time to, this isn't exactly, I diverge a bit as I do from the tea question, but this is also a great time to make fire cider, right? This is a traditional remedy. I grew up making fire cider in Italy. Many parts of the world, people make all different kinds of pickled flavored vinegars, which is what this is. It's apple cider vinegar. And you can put in there all kinds of antimicrobial herbs and veggies. So I usually put in onions, garlic, ginger, turmeric, thyme, rosemary, and black pepper. I also put in some hot peppers, which is where the name gets its fire quality. You don't have to if you don't want to. All of those other veggies and herbs are highly antimicrobial, but it's really simple. You know, people make a lot of money selling fire cider at the store, but you can quickly and easily in 5 or 10 minutes chop those things up, throw them in a jar with some thyme and rosemary, some black peppercorns, and then glug, 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 just pour the apple cider vinegar over them. Fill up your jar and let it sit on top of your refrigerator or in your cupboard for a few weeks. And then what I usually do is I strain out the herbs and veggies. I actually puree those. And you keep them in the fridge and kind of use them. I'll add a spoonful when I'm sauteing vegetables to get the pungent flavor just a little bit. And that way I use that menstruum, those leftover veggies and herbs. And then I add a little bit of honey to the vinegar, to the fire cider, to make it not quite as fiery, right? And to provide that extra antimicrobial benefit. And then, we have fire cider as an option. If you don't want to go into the process of making your own fire cider, this is a great time to just have a little spoonful of apple cider vinegar before your meals, or pour a little apple cider vinegar into your water, right? It's slightly pungent, really supportive to the lungs and to the digestion, and great for warding off the cold and flu. So
Lisa?
thank you, Christy. Great question. Go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer this. I have a lot of, I think you know this, but I have a lot of sipping cider.
That's right.
Apple cider vinegar like shots. And I don't know if any of you are local. And the cider technically, and I'll preface with this, the cider technically had to have an expiration date on it because it was made by, I think called Vermont Village. But it's got the mother in it, and I still use it, and I haven't noticed anything. In fact, it tastes even better than it has. And so if anyone would like any, and if you happen to be local, or I'm happy to ship it to you at no cost. I have a lot of it.
You
So
do.
if anyone would like any, please let me know. They come in little like single serving pouches, and a box could last you a long time, maybe through this winter anyway.
That's so thoughtful. Thank you, Nicole.
Absolutely.
And if anybody local is interested, you could let me know. And I can reach out to Nicole, and Nicole, you could even drop things off at my office on the front porch, and people could just come and grab a box. And that's very thoughtful that you would want to ship that as well. So I'll put that out there when I send out the recording, and see if anybody jumps on it. So thank you. It's great to share resources.
Lisa,
Mary.
yeah, I have a question. I was just making apple cider vinegar, fire cider, not apple cider vinegar, fire cider, a couple days ago, and one of the ingredients is horseradish. And I know I have some at our old house, but I don't know if I can get to it with everything that's grown up around it. And I'm not sure that our local stores here in Pennsylvania have it yet. But I put in a daikon radish.
Oh,
And
nice.
in the interim, and I figured if I find horseradish, I'll add it. But do you get concerned if you don't have like other ingredients? I don't care if I don't have or not, other than apple cider vinegar. But do you fret if you don't have horseradish?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No. Great question. And I love the substitution of daikon radish. That's actually another pungent vegetable that we don't think of as much, because often radishes are associated with the spring, because they are a little bit sour and bitter and go along with springtime. But daikon is a wonderful one for the fall, and a great one for bringing moisture into the body as well, through its pungent flavor. So, and it's, one of the main ingredients in kimchi, traditional kimchi anyway, which is neat. So kimchi is also a great pungent food to use as, just as a condiment, a forkful or two along with your meal. And yeah, I think horseradish is a great pungent root, and I don't think it's a deal breaker by any means. Yeah.
Thank you.
Um,
We have in this apartment complex, there's 60 units, and my guess is about 10 of them are Korean.
That's right. You were telling us that. Yes.
People have been giving me kimchi and hot
So great.
peppers.
So great.
I know. And then somebody, day before yesterday, gave me 10 bulbs of garlic.
Amazing. That's perfect.
Yeah, so I should
And
make.
this is such a good time of year for garlic, you know, and even just throwing whole cloves in with a tray of roasted root vegetables is an easy way to get your garlic without having it be overpowering your palate. You know, I love raw garlic, but when I eat raw garlic at dinner time, I feel like I wake up the next morning and I still taste the raw garlic despite having brushed my teeth. And yeah, it can feel really strong. So I do love sauteed or roasted garlic at this time of year too.
It's great raw for warts on toes.
Definitely very effective. Also very effective for poison ivy rash.
Ooh.
Yes, crushed raw garlic or garlic tincture, just applied to that rash. The garlic is a bit drawing in nature, so it draws out that urushiol, the oil that's in poison ivy that causes the rash. Very effective.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Of
Lisa, can I mention one more thing about garlic?
course, please.
I learned that with my daughter, using garlic mullein drops for any earache.
Yes,
It has saved her immediately. It remedies any kind of earache and prevented her from having to go on antibiotics because of the use of that. Her doctor, who is trained both as a homeopath and also a conventional doctor, recommended it, and I noticed I have some mullein growing in my yard, so I'm gonna try
yes.
my own at some point.
Thank you for saying that. And that's true for big humans as well as little ones. And also very easy to make. Chop up those mullein leaves, chop up the garlic, put them in olive oil, let it sit in a dark spot for a month, strain it, and you have the ear oil. And a little goes a long way. You know, just one drop is not only antimicrobial through the garlic, but also soothing to any inflammation thanks to the mullein. A wonderful tool to have on hand. And that actually, you know, makes me want to mention, just kind of expanding more, Christy, on your question of tea. I just do want to mention herbs that are great. If you do feel like you have a lung infection coming on, for some people, you know, and you'll know who you are, the fall is kind of the time when you seem to get a cold. For others, it's more the midwinter. For others, it's more the spring. So everyone has their season, and ultimately it has to do with particular deficiencies, right? And where our weak spots kind of get triggered. So if you do end up feeling like you're having a little bit of a respiratory infection going on, a little bit of a cold virus, mullein is a great herb to use in tea. If it feels like it's going down into the lungs, a root, again, the roots called elecampane, the root of a plant called elecampane is really excellent. It kind of has, it has salicylic acid in it, like willow bark or black birch bark, which is kind of has that minty feel and flavor to it. So it's like that cooling or refreshing feeling that Nicole and Christy were talking about. But it's moving phlegm and moving dampness up and out of the lungs. So elecampane is a good one. And then calendula. So not a root, but a flower. We think of calendula as antiviral. We think of it as a skin tonic. We think of it as a children's herb because it's gentle yet strong. And its antiviral action is really specific to the lungs. So I love calendula too, if you're feeling like you do have a lung infection going on. In addition to the licorice, the astragalus, the ginger, the cinnamon, and all of those are antiviral and supportive to the lungs, you know, during wellness and during illness. And during illness, I would also throw thyme into that massive concoction of different herbs. Don't feel like you have to mix them all together at once, but you know, if you're feeling like you have a lung infection, the mullein, the calendula, the thyme, you know, just pouring boiling water over those and letting them steep is great. And then you could also make a root tea, you know, and kind of alternate between those two. Not all of us have the time or the capacity to do that. And there are plenty of herbal tea blends that contain those ingredients. You know, I always look to traditional medicinals. They're kind of the therapeutic dose tea company that's been out there since the 70s. That's wonderful. So you can also get the tea bag version of everything that I'm describing. And now that you've heard me talk about these things, you'll read the labels and those herbs will kind of pop out at you and it's like, oh yeah, great. Oh, the mullein. Oh yeah, the licorice. Good. Okay. So good to have those sorts of things on hand as well. But I think if you find that you eat more, you know, pungent foods as condiments this time of year, it's just going to support the lungs and large intestine that much more. And you might feel like you don't even, you know, if you're someone who tends to get sick in the fall, you'll feel like, oh gosh, I made it through to winter and I'm all good. Nicole, go for it.
So sorry, I don't know any of you. I feel like I just keep talking, but it just so happens, Lisa, that I was exposed to somebody who knows something about monk fruit, and they
Oh,
were
yeah.
using the Chinese name for it, but they got me, they were up in Burlington at an Asian market, and they got this plastic bag of dried monk fruit, whole monk fruit. And I watched an instructional video to clean the outside of it. And I'm not recommending this to anybody. This is just something I learned, and that's something that worked for me. Brush the outside of it, put it in boiling water for, I think it was 30 minutes. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention, you crush it. So you kind of have to like feel around and feel for the sweet spot, and then, or pound it. And even the shell of it and all the fruit that's dried inside, just kind of pick it apart. I put it in boiling water for 30 minutes, and then the sediment kind of fell to the bottom. And then I kind of like ladled out the tea, and it's so sweet. Somebody compared it to like the sweet tea of the South. And but it was like earthy, almost there's kind of like a mushroomy sort of flavor to it. I really enjoy it. But she said, you know, she'd been getting it from her mom since she was a kid, and they call it the stuff. So if they start feeling anything upper respiratory, they would give the kids the stuff. And I literally just tried this last, what day is it today? Monday. I tried this last Wednesday. I had a little bit started going on up in this whole area, and by evening I didn't have any of it, and it hasn't returned. And I don't know if that's a fluke or if you can speak to that, Lisa, at all.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, in Chinese medicine, it's considered kind of the elixir of life, right? And it's become kind of popularized in the health food industry because it's so incredibly sweet, but has zero glycemic load, zero impact on the blood sugar, right? So people use it as an alternative sweetener when they don't want to sweeten with sugar or maple syrup even, right? And you can get it, that very sweet fruit that you decocted, that you cooked down, gets tinctured, you know, soaked in alcohol or soaked in vegetable glycerin, and then you can use drops of it, like in tea or in baked goods, you know. if I was putting that extract in tea, I would literally put 1 drop in there because it's so incredibly sweet. And yes, it truly is antimicrobial, antiviral, and antibacterial. So it's great if it's something that you want to, include in your repertoire, even if you're cooking or baking or, even making little energy bites, right? And you want them to taste sweeter, you can put a little bit of that in there and also know that you're getting the antimicrobial benefit from that sweetener. So thank you for sharing that. I do not think that was a fluke.
How can we buy it?
So you can get monk fruit extract. There's a company called Now Foods that makes it, and it's actually available through Well of Eight, the online dispensary that some of us use, and you can easily find it online. And I'll kind of send, in the recording email, I'll also send a link to a little more information about the plan. It's called Huangzhao in Chinese. And I'm sure that, if Nicole's friend found it in an Asian market, it's available at most Asian markets and is going to require a little more preparation than actually just buying a little bottle of the extract.
Right.
But
what would you ask for in an Asian market?
The Huangzhao.
How do you know that?
I'll send that to you
in
my email. Yeah. So you have that.
Okay. We have
yeah.
a Korean-owned international grocery store here, like a supermarket. So if anybody would have it, probably they would.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Nicole. I love that. And I love that you'd made the tea. That's awesome.
Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate it too.
What else? Other thoughts or questions?
I just have a comment, I guess.
Yeah.
It's interesting that we were talking about feeling overwhelmed because I was going back through some of my notes from the other Health Academy sessions and the work that you and I did last year. And I very easily get overwhelmed by all of this information about nutrition and food. I don't know how you can keep it straight. As many times as I've heard you talk about the 5 elements and the Ayurveda 3 body types and stuff, it just all smushes together in my brain and I can't sort it out. And that's why I'm grateful that that you're doing these sessions on an ongoing basis, because I need to hear it over and over again to be able to pull out something that I can focus on for right now and not have to try to keep it all in my head. I have another new page of notes from tonight, but I'll just have to pick out a couple things that I want to focus on. It was helpful to hear you say that we don't have to take it all in. That's right. We really don't. And discernment is the name of the game right now. And I think we all need to hear it over and over again, right? And that's the nature of reality, is we're always going through these cycles. And each time we cycle through, it's familiar in some ways, and then it's brand new in other ways, because we're new and we're different. I mean, I kind of equate that right now to the fall foliage. Every year, I'm thinking, oh, it's not going to happen this year. No, it's just all the leaves are turning brown. They're falling off the trees. Ugh, bummer. It's not happening. It's not happening this year. And then all of a sudden, there it is. I had a client say to me last week, he said, I have it in my calendar, peak foliage. It's always between October 5th and 7th. And I was like, whoa, okay. And he was right, basically. And it's just a good reminder that we experience these things in our lives sort of over and over again, and yet
they're always sort of mysterious and miraculous and new. And then we forget, right? How easily we forget. It's like, oh, this is what's happening in the fall. That's right. The leaves are letting go, the plants are letting go. And that's what I can do too. And I love that notion, Judith, of just like picking out a couple things. It's like, ooh, this is what stands out. Licorice tea and roasted garlic, right? Just like taking those.
But maybe not together.
Not together. Yeah, before and after. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that.
For people with high blood pressure, that was the problem. David's was like at stroke levels this last week.
No
So,
licorice.
no licorice. Is there a substitute?
No. In terms of sort of licorice's unique properties, there really is not a substitute. And a lot of those other herbs we were talking about are all antiviral. So I feel like they are, kind of equitable, right? On that same plane. For those of us who can't do licorice, it's okay. It's like, there's this whole plate of options and we can pick a few. Just like you were talking about with the horseradish, Mary, it's not a deal breaker to not be able to do licorice.
Okay, thanks.
Good question. You're welcome. Anything else that's coming up for folks? If you're watching the recording, you can always send me a note, ask me a question.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's very
Yes.
informative and wonderful, like Judith said, to get kind of, it's like a refreshment in a way. It's, revisiting some information and hearing it anew and trying it on and, just sitting with it. So thank you.
Yes. You're welcome. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. Nice to see all your faces.
And Judith, I'm so glad you said what you did about being overwhelmed at the information, because I have felt that way over years of, sitting in lectures with different people and wondering why in the world, all the elements and everything associated doesn't go in and stick there. And, and so it's nice to know that, it's not unique to any individual.
It's
Maybe
not.
unique that Lisa remembers everything.
I do remember. And to be fair, I also, before we meet, sit with my big Yellow Emperor classic of Chinese medicine, and I read what was written about the metal element, because it helps me to just hear those, read those words again and let them kind of wash over me as well. And I always get something new and different out of it too. So we're all collectively remembering and forgetting all the time. That's what makes us human.
Well, Lisa, this was my very first session, and so
Welcome.
excited that it worked out. I just drove in from Maine this evening,
Oh my
and
gosh.
my daughter is being very patient while I'm on the call. So, but it was so nice to meet all of you.
You too.
What a wonderful group. I'm really excited to learn more from all of you, and I'm so glad to be reconnected with you, Lisa.
Absolutely. Likewise. And we'll see each other on the new moon.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good night.
So glad you're here.
Thank you.
Do we have a date yet for the next session?
The date for the next session, that's such a good question. The new moon is the last Tuesday of October. So let me tell
25th.
you. The 25th?
Yeah. That's what my
Perfect.
calendar says.
Perfect. I will trust your calendar. Tuesday, October 25th. Save the date.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
7:30, and yeah, I'll send out a reminder as well.
It's really helpful when we know in advance, so if it's possible
Yes,
to save the time we can.
yes,
Thank you.
absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Happy full
Good,
moon.
everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
You too.
Bye.
Everybody.
Okay, good